Of recent, have you traveled from Nairobi to Mombasa or from Mombasa to Nairobi by road? If so, share your experience. But before you share your experience, let me give you my experience. This year in September, I traveled from Nairobi to Mombasa by road. As you leave Nairobi or exit Nairobi, there is smoothness. You reach Machakos County, this smoothness. But as you go beyond Machakos County, you start feeling some roughness. And for me, I traveled by bus. And on that bus, as the road gets rough and rougher, you feel the pain. You'll have to jump and jump. And eventually, at some point, almost there was an accident. At any point that the driver could accelerate, you could feel that any moment there could be an accident. And I remember at some point we had to complain on the bus. So meaning that road is not as smooth as you people say. And because of that, Kenya and the United States signed an agreement that would have delivered Usahihi Expressway. But until now, we don't have Usahihi Expressway. And now, let me tell you what really happened. Now, the United States and the Kenyan government signed a deal worth $3.6 billion. And if you have to convert it to Kenyan shillings, that would give you 477 billion Kenyan shillings. And if you use perhaps the current rate, that is likely to go higher. But what is happening on that highway? Today, many Kenyans are complaining. I've seen people say that the coastal people have been neglected because that proposal to have Usahihi Expressway was actually cancelled. And how was it cancelled? After Kenya and the United States signed an agreement that would have led to the construction of that expressway, Ever Strong Capital delivered its proposal to the government. There was a PPP committee that reviewed that proposal and later cancelled it. PPP committee cancelled that proposal, and it said because some requirements of PPP Act 2021 were not met. However, Ever Strong Capital said that its proposal was updated, and the government asked Ever Strong Capital to restructure its proposal. So finally, there was no construction that started. And today we are celebrating 2025 festive season, where there is too much traffic on Nairobi-Mombasa highway. And many Kenyans are complaining. I've seen that online, but people forgot that proposal to have Usahihi Expressway was cancelled on grounds that I think were reasonable. Now imagine this: if we have to toll a 440-kilometer road that is from Nairobi to Mombasa or from Mombasa to Nairobi, and you're told to pay 8 Kenya shillings per kilometer, how much will you have to fish out to arrive at your destination? A lot of money. Perhaps if you drive, you're likely to pay 8,000 Kenyan shillings. I know the travel time reduces because you'll have to drive for 4.5 hours, that is from Nairobi to Mombasa or from Mombasa to Nairobi, right? And that makes you happy because right now people are spending 80 hours and even more than that to either reach Nairobi or Mombasa. But if this expressway would have been built, you'd just be spending 4.5 hours on that road. Now, economically, was it making sense? From my assessment, that was not making sense, because here Kenya was entering a 30-year concession that for 30 years, Ever Strong Capital would have managed that expressway. But looking at our economy, even you yourself, picture it this way: would you pay 8,000 Kenyan shillings just for one way to drive on that expressway? That was very unsustainable. And also, this is a very important corridor. And having such a highway tolled wasn't making sense to many people. And economically, as I mentioned, it was unsustainable. And after the reassessment, the government dropped that expressway deal, as I've mentioned. So until now, those who have known what is happening on Rironi, Nakuru, Mau Summit are saying, Mr. President, why did you drop that project? And I even heard someone by the name Kalonzo Musyoka saying that that road or that expressway project was cancelled politically. And he didn't factor in the economic aspect of it. As I've asked, will you be in a position to pay 8,000 Kenyan shillings to drive on that highway just one way? I know most of you would say no. How about if we have the current highway expanded at a lower cost so that you use it freely? That makes sense. So after dropping that deal, the government had to review its decision and said, instead of building Usahihi Expressway, we are going to expand what we already have. That the existing highway, Nairobi Mombasa highway, will just be expanded, perhaps to 6 lanes or 4 lanes, or in some section you have 4 lanes, in another section you have 6 lanes, depending on traffic, because the government definitely does a feasibility study and understand where do we need 6 lanes and where do we need 4 lanes. So people in the coastal region are complaining that President Ruto did not do them well and he dropped that project. But I need you to look at it economically. It wasn't making sense. So expansion of the current highway makes sense. And if you've listened to President Ruto, on many occasions, he has said that he understands that major commercially viable highways need to be expanded. We need, for instance, 4 lanes, 6 lanes, for we to be in a position where we can grow our economy. We need to reduce the amount of time we spend on roads. We need to reduce road accidents. The president understands that. But also, we must face an economic reality. Imagine Kenya spending 477 billion Kenyan shillings just on that highway from its budget. That is unsustainable. And also, imagine Kenyans being told to use that highway for 30 years, where you have to pay 8,000 Kenyan shillings just for one way. This is my feeling. Tolling makes sense for short distances, but for 440 kilometers, you toll it in an economy like this, it will not make sense. I also understand that the current SGR was brought so that we stop depending just on the current highway. But until now, the traffic on that highway hasn't been solved. And at the same time, I've mentioned that the existing highway is rough. And that's why many accidents occur on that road. And that is why there's also traffic. Because when the road is rough, people will definitely complain that, you know what, you need to drive at slower speed. Because we still have to reach home safe. Nobody wants to die. You get that point. So politically, people will still complain. But if you sit down and face the economic realities, you'll actually agree with me that the decision to have that deal cancelled made sense. But moving forward, the president and his team definitely will have to find a solution. And beginning next year, President Ruto is considering what to do and what is right for that highway. I know that highway defines what Kenya is. You know what? 440 kilometers. We want to get to Mombasa, at least we go to the beach. Also those in Mombasa want to get to Nairobi, and also we have trucks because we have to do business with Uganda and many other countries. So meaning this Mombasa-Nairobi highway is so crucial. So as President Ruto focuses on Nairobi to Western highways, those in the coastal region are also saying, Mr. President, you have to do something here. So that is something that President Ruto is aware of. But also, economically, we may have some challenges. But let's see, moving forward, this deal that President Ruto signed with the US government, will it be effected at an affordable cost so that that highway doesn't burden many Kenyans who just want to travel very fast to do business that will definitely improve our economy? So people in the coastal region understand this, that President Ruto is still focused to have Nairobi Mombasa road addressed, because that is so crucial, not just for the coastal people but also for the entire country, because we have one economy. So put the politics aside, put the activism aside, and understand that we face an economic reality that sometimes demands we don't just rush things. Instead, we look at what is viable and what can be readdressed and what can be pushed forward for more review. So Nairobi Mombasa highway, as I know, it is under review, because for President Ruto is looking at what is viable. Can we do an expressway where we toll? And economically, will it make sense to our people? Will our people be in a position to pay? So Nairobi Mombasa highway will definitely be addressed. What do you think of the cancellation of Usahihi Expressway and your frustration today? Do you think that the government would have just struck that deal and started the construction of Nairobi Mombasa highway?
And so, when it comes to this highway, the situation was clear. If we waited for the national budget to release resources for this project, we would have waited for a lifetime. If we borrowed, we would have added to our debt burden and burdened our children for generations to come. If we taxed more, we would have suffocated families. And if we did nothing, we would have surrendered to stagnation. That is the reality and crisis our country has faced for years. Stagnation born out of helplessness, born out of lack of ambition, imagination, and innovation. This stagnation has become a quiet paralysis that crept into our systems, into our confidence, and into our national spirit. It convinced us that mediocrity was normal, that average was acceptable, that delay was destiny, stagnation, that is truth, was slow regression. But today, we break those chains. We promised to be innovators. We promised to build differently. And today, we keep that promise boldly, unapologetically, and unmistakably.